In June 2017, 4 people around the world in 4 separate countries and in 4 different cities set out to invite their LinkedIn network to meet offline. Now, the idea was, let's get to know the people behind the profiles without the sales. Over the course of almost 18 months, what started off as 4 people, 4 countries, and 4 cities turned into 1,000 people, 77 countries, and over 500 cities, all through the power of connection, more importantly, human connection, and the desire to connect with others and build community. But before I explain that story, we're going to go to my story and how it ties in with that one. So when I was younger, I really aspired to work in the city. I had the big corporate dream. I want to work in Canary Wharf. I want to earn a lot of money. I want the nice holidays and the designer clothes. I want to be in management. When I was 24, I reached that goal when I'd originally set it for 30. And upon getting that goal, I had a massive breakdown and had what I call a wonderful quarter-life crisis. And I see a lot of smiles in the audience, and some of you may know what I'm talking about. And in this sort of quarter-life crisis, I set out to get to know why that had happened and what I wanted to do instead of working in the corporate world. And I set out to sort of self-explore. I left my job back in February 2017 last year, and I thought, I'm going to start to meet my connections offline. So the day I left my corporate job, I put a post on LinkedIn that said, when I was a little girl, I used to dream of working in the tall building with a pointy top by the river. And having got there, I realized that my definition of success was skewed. It was based on money, power, and status. And what I realized as an adult was that with that comes a lot of stress, anxiety, depression, to name a few. But upon getting to the top of that building, I realized that sometimes it takes getting to where you want to be to realize it's not where you're meant to be. That post went viral on LinkedIn and had over 80,000 people view it. And all of a sudden, overnight, I was catapulted in the limelight and had thousands of invites to connect, thousands of comments to reply to. And it started making me think, why was this so important? Why were people so interested in this? And it was because it was incredibly relatable and people could connect on a common subject that a lot of people wanted to talk about, but didn't have the space to do so. So after that post went viral and it was online, I thought, let me speak to some of these people offline. I started to go to coffees with some of my LinkedIn connections that I was talking to, and I hashtagged it virtual reality, virtual to reality. And I started to meet people for coffees, and at that point, I had no clue what I was going to do with my life. I started to get to know people and ask them questions like, what do you do outside of work? What are you passionate about? Everything that wasn't related to what they did for a living, and just got to know them. I had nothing to sell them. They had nothing to sell me. One of the examples of that coffee was a guy named Taha. Now, Taha created content on LinkedIn, like me, and I said to him, I'd really love to go for a coffee and get to know you. And at the time, he was based in LA, and he was going to be in London, so I met him, and I said to him, you know, it's great to finally meet. And he said, yeah, me too. I'm so glad to meet you because I love what you write about. And I thought, that's funny, I was just about to say the same to you. And so we started chatting about everything and anything, his upbringing, his education, my upbringing, etc., what got us to where we were today. And at the end of the conversation, Taha kind of got to the part where we talk about work. And he said, Alex, whenever you decide to set up a business, I want to be the first to know. And I said, really? Why? And he said, well, you know, something that that's not really on my LinkedIn profile and I don't really talk about it openly, is that actually I run a real estate company on Park Lane. And somewhere along the lines, I'd figured out this guy was really, really rich. And so he kind of, in a polite way said, I'm a millionaire, as you do. And I thought, like, oh my dear God, how have I ended up in this situation? And the truth was that conversation would have gone really differently had I known that piece of information beforehand. Because I wasn't out to get anything. I just thought, you write well, I like writing, we tend to engage on each other's stuff. And that was what I started to understand was the power of taking your online connections offline. We got to know each other as people, not as business opportunities, not as sales opportunities, but ways to connect on a human level. After I met Taha, I met a numerous amount of people, so I probably went about 2 to 3 coffees or teas during the week, because that was like an overdose in caffeine for a while. And I got to know people in exactly the same way I did with Taha. When I eventually set up my business and people found out what I was doing, almost about 70% of those turned into clients. Why? Because I never sold them anything. I just got to know them, I got to know their challenges, and when eventually that conversation came about after numerous conversations, it wasn't about trying to get something, it was trying to build that connection to then eventually have a partnership with them. So in June or around May time, something popped up in my feed about a lady called Anna McAfee in Australia, in a really small town called Coffs Harbour. And she basically put online, I'm planning to meet my LinkedIn connections offline in a group setting. And I thought, ooh, that's virtual to reality, but with loads of people. That sounds cool. Let's do that in London. So I got in touch with her, and she said, well, actually, I haven't planned my event yet. And I said, great, I want to find out more. But I wasn't the only one that got in touch with her. So did 3 other people. Someone in New York, someone in Brussels, and myself in London, and Anna, obviously, in Sydney, or just outside of Sydney. And what happened was we all got on a Skype call, and we said, what's the plan? What are we going to do? And she said, let's meet our connections offline, make it human. No one can sell, no one can pitch, no one can swap business cards. This is like the anti-networking event based on the most professional networking website there is, LinkedIn. And so we started doing that. And we started in June. All of us did our first one. We fed back to each other what worked, what didn't work. And then shortly after, probably around September time, someone said, Alex, can I come to your event and video it? And I said, sure, but this is voluntary. I have no money. I have no budget. And they said, no, that's fine. We'll just do it as a favor. And I said, yeah, great, let's do that. So all of a sudden, people started seeing what LinkedIn Local looked like and what was the power behind the events we were creating. They weren't your typical networking event. That video kind of went a little bit everywhere. Then Manu, my co-founder in New York, was in Singapore and did a pop-up one. And Jeff Weiner, the CEO of LinkedIn, found out because many times he was tagged in our content. And all of a sudden, 1.5 million people saw LinkedIn Local virtually. And we were inundated with requests. What is it about? How do you set one up? How do you go about it? How can I find one in my area? I travel in business. How do I go to one in Singapore when I'm based in Melbourne? And so we had a bit of an issue on our hands, but one that we never intended to have because it was never meant to grow into this massive movement. And then Ryan came along, based in Washington, and he said, hey guys, I love what you guys are doing. Can I build you a website? And we were like, great, but we have no money. We're just a voluntary-led community. He said, yeah, that's no problem. I'll do it as a favor. So then, all of a sudden, we had a website. All of a sudden, we had an onboarding process. All of a sudden, we had people that could see where our events were. And then we started getting more people involved, more strategically. So out of the 4 co-founders, 2 of us had really big followings on LinkedIn, Manu and myself. And we started talking to our friends, our virtual friends that also had big followings and saying, you should meet with the people that follow you. You should set one of these up. And that snowballed into hundreds and hundreds of events. And every single week, we have more and more people wanting to get involved, which is still a community-led movement of networking. So a lot of this is to sort of emphasize the fact that none of it was profit-based. None of it was sales-based. It was always human-based. It was trying to bridge that gap between online and offline, because a lot of people sit in the online space and are happy to engage, but then in the offline space, hate going to networking events. And maybe it's because you haven't found the right networking events. Maybe it's because you're fearful about meeting people and connecting. And actually, what I didn't mention at the start is that I am the most introverted person you will ever meet. So to become one of the co-founders of one of the largest and longest running networking communities on LinkedIn was the craziest thing. And actually, when I got that job at quite a young age, I set out to do things that I feared the most. And my personal way of doing it, which is a bit masochistic, was basically going to networking events over and over and over and over to get rid of the fear that actually all I'm doing is speaking with someone else, someone that I don't know, someone that I've yet to know, and that actually us as humans have so many things in common, things that we can connect on, and essentially, you just need to ask the right questions. So as a basis, I kind of put together like a step-by-step guide of what this looked like. Map who is in your network. More often than not, the people that are really, really sort of those low-hanging fruits are already in your network. Taha was in my network. A lot of the clients I have to this day were people that were in my network already. And yet we tend to think about, oh, actually, I've got to go to this networking event and meet people. Look at who's already in your network. Another thing to note is a lot of people tend to think, oh, well, if that person can't help me, they're not of much value to me. Wrong. Most of my potential clients or clients that I've had have come off people going, I'm sorry, I don't really need your service, or I can't help you with that, but you know what? That person is looking for what you're doing. Next, identify and target your audience. Go to networking events with a strategy, not just to, oh, I'm just going to casually stroll and meet people. Try and sort of, if there are people that you specifically want to talk to, try and identify who those are before you go. And even more so is go to LinkedIn, find out if they're going, and then message them and say, do you fancy grabbing a coffee in between these two sessions? Or can we have a chat after the conference? That's a great way of using your initiative and being sort of one step forward. Next, engage and add value. This goes for online and offline. If you're creating content on LinkedIn like myself, it's incredibly easy to push those people from a maybe working with you to a yes. Why? Because they see different touch points. They see me online, they see me in person, they see me online again, and by the time I meet them in person the second time, they're already thinking, okay, now I want to work with you. Why? Because they've gotten to know me over time, and I'm constantly in their line of visibility. Next, develop and grow your network. Ensure that you're constantly nurturing it, because honestly, like the minute you stop connecting, the minute that you'll stop being visible, the minute that you're not visible online and offline, that all starts to disappear because you're not at the forefront of people's minds. And lastly, I'd like to end with, I welcome you all to a LinkedIn Local. There are hundreds of them, well, there are now thousands of them all around the world, but we have at least 10 in London, some that are themed for women, some that are themed for tech, etc. And I ask you next time, that you're going out there to a networking event, try and avoid the question, what do you do for a living? And instead ask something else. Thank you.
That was the best presentation from an introvert I've ever seen in my life. So you used to be an introvert?
I still am.
No, you're not.
I'm selectively extroverted.
Selectively?
Yes.
That's good. I think we've got some questions. And don't forget, we've got the catch box thing. It's good fun if you want to ask a question of Alex. Great. So what do we got? Amazing story, thank you. What are your top 3 tips for networking? They can't remember 5. They don't want steps, they want 3.
Yeah, so I would say avoid asking people what they do for a living, because it's memorable. When you ask them something that isn't that, they're like, whoa, that's caught me off guard, and you make them think. I would say never sell absolutely never sell. Like, that's just a no-no. And lastly, I would say make sure you've got online and offline touch points, as I mentioned. Like, make sure you have some form of visibility online and offline, because it makes that process easier. Don't just network offline, network online, and bring those, you know, continuously go back and forth between the two, I'd say.
I usually ask people which is their favorite child, because that's usually interesting. No, I don't really. Oh yeah, okay, you've covered that one. Should you talk about business?
I think you should. I just don't think it should be the first thing you talk about. I don't think it should be a priority, because what you're trying to do is flip the sales process in its head. Get to know them as a person. That way they know, like, and trust you. And once they do, then you start to talk about business, because shoving something in their face, just use a quick example. When you get those emails, those e-newsletters, or you go to an event and someone's trying to shove a business card in your face, do you enjoy that? No. So why would you do that to someone else?
Yeah. It's about relationship.
Exactly. It's all about building authentic relationships.
How long does it take to build a network?
Okay, so from the space of me leaving my corporate job in February 2017 to December 2017, when I got named LinkedIn Top Voice, that amount of time, I grew my network by 20,000 people.
Wow.
And that wasn't through me looking, like, adding people. That was just through people coming to me because they'd either seen my content online or they'd met me in person at events.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And how many you got now?
I'm just about to hit 30,000.
30. So my 10 people that are in mine are. So that's a bit sad, isn't it? No, I haven't really. Any questions before we say goodbye to Alex? No? Alex, thank you very much. That was amazing. Give me a doodle. All right. Thank you.